Does any other country rely on young, relatively untrained people to do the toughest teaching jobs?
Well, actually, I think what you can say is almost the opposite, that high-performing systems try to get the most qualified, the most talented teachers, the best educated teachers into the most challenging classrooms. Some do that through incentives. Basically, they create incentives. But if you look to the example of Shanghai, you know, they build all career perspectives around this. If you are a vice principal in a school, in a high-performing school, the only way for you to become a principal is actually to take on one of those low-performing schools, show that you can turn it around. And they don't leave you alone. They basically allow you to take your best teachers with you. So they build networks of schools. They try to build capacity at the front line to create networks of innovation. That's a very, very strong approach in those systems. Basically, having mechanisms that don't leave teachers in isolation confronting difficult challenges, but basically get the most qualified people into the most difficult circumstances.
A lot of the other countries, as you say, recruit the very top of the profession, the top students into the teaching profession. In this country, it hasn't quite been the case, but some of these programs, like Teach for America, that send young people into challenging classrooms are doing that. They are attracting from the top colleges. So it seems like the United States has it about half right, as opposed to that what they should be doing is attracting the top, but not just for like a Peace Corps-like stint in an urban school, but to make them lifelong teachers. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the challenge is not just to attract a few bright people into the profession, but to raise the status of the entire profession, to ensure that teaching also offers inspiring careers for talented people, that teaching isn't sort of a one-size-fits-all job, but that there is career diversity, career differentiation, that teachers find, like in any other profession, in any other knowledge profession, a way to move up in the system. And I think where systems provide those kinds of incentives and perspectives for teachers, teaching becomes very attractive. You know, last year Finland got 6,000 applicants for 600 teaching jobs, not because teaching is so well paid, but because it is a fascinating work environment in which people like to invest.
And we have heard from teacher union presidents and other supporters of teacher unions in the United States that other high-performing countries like Finland have unionized teaching forces. As you know, in this country, teacher unions have been cast as part of the problem that is preventing a highly skilled kind of collaborative approach to teaching that you describe. Can you explain a little bit what the difference is between the union in Finland, or what unionization means to teachers in Finland versus what unionization means and the effect it has had on teaching in the United States?
Yeah, the first thing you can see is that in most countries, unionization of teachers is actually higher than in the United States. But we also see that unions in many of the highest performing education systems are very much like professional organizations. They're not just dealing with salaries and working conditions, but they're very much concerned with advancing the professional status of teachers. So teachers turn to unions to represent their professional interest as much as their sort of salaries and other issues. So basically, there's less of a difference between the profession and labor or industrial relations.
And you would say that in this country, the unions are still focused more on the industrial relations side of representing their or what they feel their
at least
their
what's
job
what you
is.
would. I mean, I can't really judge this. I'm not an expert on this, but that's what you can sort of hear in the public. That sort of the discourse between government and union is very much on industrial relationships. There's not that much of a discourse at the professional side. And basically, what you can see is that sort of professional autonomy of teachers embedded in a collaborative culture of teachers is a very, very important condition for success in an education system, like in any other profession.
Well, some big debates around unionization of teachers in the U.S. are around the issues of merit pay and seniority. You know, if you need to lay off a teacher, it's the youngest might be the best teacher even because they lack seniority, or that pay scales are for the most part based entirely on experience. Is that the case in other countries, or is there different ways of is there what we would merit pay is a very complicated system, but is there a different compensation system, a different advancement system in these other countries compared to the U.S.?
In 40% of the OECD countries, the performance of teachers influences their pay. So it's actually quite common now And what's interesting, there are some countries where those systems are actually developed jointly by governments and unions. You know, Sweden has even abandoned the system of universal pay. It has an individual pay system, but it's not something that remains very controversial. It's something actually that unions as professional organizations negotiate as a system with government, and something that is very much appreciated by teachers. So I don't think one should sort of pitch things like tying performance of teachers to pay with sort of unions versus government. Actually, you can see great examples where those issues are negotiated.
And how is the performance judged or measured in these other countries?
That's a very sort of tricky issue. The one thing I want to say here is that in many of the countries there is more reliance on professional judgment than on sort of objective measurement systems. School principals have a large role to play in this, sometimes external observations and so on. It's more like you would have in the business sector in the United States. People make judgments on this, and they're not always contestable. I don't think you have as much focus as in the United States on trying to sort of tie the performance of teachers to a test score or something like this. That's actually quite rare. If test scores are used, they're always used as one of multiple measures of success.
And one other thing, I noticed in your report, when you, in the summary at the end, when you were talking about lessons, and I myself have witnessed this, other countries still want to come to the United States and look at their education system for what they can learn. They seem to be convinced that for all its flaws and problems, that somehow the U.S. produces the most creative thinkers, the best innovators, and that even if they have high test scores, they're not quite sure that's going to get them where they want to go. And I'm just wondering what your perspective, and if you would comment a little bit on that.
I think that's absolutely true. I also don't see the greatest challenge of the United States at the top end of the distribution. You do have great schools, great students. The proportion of students succeeding on PISA is average at the top end of the scale. The challenge is more at the bottom end of the distribution, where social impact makes more of a difference than it does in other countries, where there is a larger group of students falling behind. That's probably the greater challenge. At the top end, I think the United States has a lot to offer, a lot of diversity, a lot of innovation happening in local areas that is very worthwhile for other countries to study, and that will continue to be studied. I'm convinced of that.
Well, thank you very much for coming to our conference, and thank you for this great insights.
You're very welcome.